Lieutenant Anders watched the moon crack open like an egg. Its inner core was writhing. The broken satellite hung in space like a shattered skull, and from the fractures poured something that moved with purpose. Not ships, not creatures, something between flesh and metal that breathed in the vacuum of space. "What in hell's name is that?" whispered Corporal Martinez through the comm, her voice tight with the kind of fear that came from seeing something fundamentally wrong with the universe. Anders adjusted his rifle's targeting scope, though he doubted bullets would help against whatever was emerging from the moon's corpse. "I don't know, Martinez, but it's heading straight for the colony." The silent signal. Admiral Kira Holland stood before the tactical display aboard the heavy cruiser Determination, her weathered hands gripping the command rail as she studied the data streaming in from Colony 7B. Or rather, the complete absence of data. 3 weeks of silence, she said to her assembled officers. No distress calls, no shipping manifests, no routine check-ins. An entire world of 40,000 colonists just stops talking. Major Eli Drax shifted in his chair, the cybernetic implants along his jaw clicking softly as he processed the information. He was built like a weapon. All sharp angles and controlled violence, and his Special Forces team had pulled off boarding actions that other units would call suicide missions. Could be equipment failure, solar flares, pirates with jamming tech. 47 different communication arrays all failing simultaneously. Dr. Naira Keene looked up from her portable lab setup, pushing a strand of silver hair from her eyes. She'd spent the last decade studying xenobiological threats, cataloging the ways alien life could surprise and horrify. The statistical probability approaches zero, Major. Ensign Rio Valles, barely 22, and still adjusting to his role as the fleet's primary FTL navigator, ran calculations in his head faster than most computers could process them. "Admiral, the jump coordinates are clean. Whatever's happening at 7B, we can reach them in 18 hours. Holland nodded slowly. The 5th Expeditionary Fleet consisted of 12 ships and nearly 8,000 personnel, humanity's finest scattered across the outer rim, protecting colonies that most Earthborn citizens couldn't find on a star chart. Set course for Colony 7B, Ensign. All ships combat alert status. Something tells me this isn't a communication problem." The heartbeat sun. When they dropped out of FTL at the edge of the 7B system, the first thing they noticed was the star. "That's not right," Velez whispered, staring at his navigation display. "Stars don't pulse." The system's sun was beating like a massive heart, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that seemed almost organic. With each pulse, waves of strange energy rippled outward through space, and the fleet's instruments screamed warnings about radiation signatures they couldn't identify. "All ships maintain defensive formation," Helen ordered, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. "Long-range sensors, give me a picture of the colony." The tactical officer's face went pale as data flowed across his screens. "Admiral, I'm reading massive structural damage across all primary settlements, but, ma'am, I'm also detecting movement. Lots of it." "Survivors?" Drax asked, already thinking about evacuation protocols. "I don't think so, sir. The movement patterns are wrong, like they're moving in formation, but not human formation." Dr. Keene was hunched over her xenobiology scanner, her expression growing more troubled by the second. "Admiral, I'm detecting organic compounds in the debris field around the planet. Biological matter that doesn't match any known species, including human." Helen felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. Whatever had happened to Colony 7B, it wasn't pirates or equipment failure. "Major Drax, prep your teams for reconnaissance, full hazmat protocols. Dr. Keene, I want you on the landing party. If we're dealing with an unknown biological threat, we need your expertise." "Admiral," called out the communications officer, his voice sharp with surprise. "I'm picking up a weak transmission from the planet's surface. Human origin. Put it through." Static filled the bridge, followed by a voice so broken and terrified that it barely sounded human. This is Colony 7B Emergency Station. Anyone out there, please? They wear the skin of friends and speak in our children's voices. Don't trust what you see. They're in my head. They're The transmission cut to silence. The vessel wound. The surface of Colony 7B looked like a painting done by someone who'd never seen a world that wasn't dying. The main settlement was intact but wrong. Buildings stood at angles that hurt to look at, and the streets were filled with what appeared to be civilians going about their daily routines. Except they all moved in perfect synchronization, like dancers following choreography written by an alien mind. Those aren't people anymore, Drax muttered into his comm as his insertion team crept through the abandoned outskirts of New Geneva. His enhanced vision could pick up details that would have been invisible to unaugmented eyes, and what he saw made his skin crawl. They're wearing human faces, but they're not. They're not breathing right. The movements are too fluid. From orbit, Dr. Keene monitored the team's biometrics and studied the organic samples they'd transmitted. Major, whatever process has affected the colonists appears to be rewriting their nervous systems. I'm seeing neural patterns that suggest external control. External how? Hallen demanded from the bridge. Something is using their brains like relay stations. They're not individuals anymore. They're components in a larger system. Valles, monitoring the team's progress from his navigation station, suddenly sat up straight. Admiral, I'm detecting a massive gravitational anomaly on the far side of the planet. Something big just entered the system. The thing that emerged from behind Colony 7B defied every assumption humanity had made about spacecraft design. It was the size of a continent, but it moved like a living creature. Its hull, if it could be called a hull, was a mixture of metal and flesh with massive wounds that opened and closed like breathing orifices. Through those wounds, smaller vessels poured out like blood cells from a ruptured artery. "My God," breathed the tactical officer. "It's not a ship, it's alive." Dr. Keene's hands flew over her instruments as she tried to catalog what they were seeing. "Admiral, this entity is broadcasting on multiple electromagnetic and psionic frequencies. It's trying to establish contact with something on the planet's surface, possibly the affected colonists." "Sir," Drax's voice crackled through the comm from the planet below, "we found the source of that transmission. There's a survivor barricaded in the emergency bunker. Single human female appears unaffected by whatever got the others. Extract her immediately," Hallen ordered. "I want to know what happened down there." Memories of the consumed. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she'd been the colony's head of xenoarchaeology. When Drax's team brought her aboard the Determination, she couldn't stop shaking. "It started with the excavation," she told them in the medical bay, her eyes darting between faces as if checking to make sure they were real. "We found ruins buried beneath the northern plateau, ancient structures that didn't match any known architectural patterns. The dig team brought up artifacts, crystalline formations that seemed to contain some kind of data storage." Dr. Keene leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "What kind of data?" "Memories," Sarah whispered, "not recordings or historical records, actual memories from beings that lived millions of years ago. The crystals were still active, still broadcasting, and when our people touched them," she couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. The implications were already forming in Keene's mind like a nightmare taking shape. "The entity consumed them," Keene said quietly. "Not their bodies, their identities. It absorbed their memories, their personalities, their sense of self. Then it used those stolen identities to control their physical forms." Hallen studied the tactical display showing the massive bioship holding position near the planet. "Doctor, are you saying this thing feeds on consciousness itself?" "I think it's worse than that, Admiral. I think it collects consciousness. Every species it encounters, every individual it consumes, they all become part of a vast gestalt entity that grows stronger and more complex with each meal." From his position at the navigation console, Velez was running calculations that made his head spin. "Admiral, if this thing has been traveling between stars for millions of years, consuming civilizations, how many minds might it contain?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. "The Cathedral of Flesh." "We can't fight it conventionally," Drax said during the emergency strategy meeting. "Our weapons might damage its physical structure, but if it's truly a collective consciousness, destroying the body won't kill the mind." Dr. Keene had been working non-stop since Chen's rescue, developing what she called a cognitive virus, a piece of code designed to disrupt the neural networks that allowed the entity to control its absorbed minds. In theory, we could free some of the absorbed personalities, create enough chaos in its collective consciousness to weaken its control. In theory, Helen repeated grimly. There's only one way to deliver it, Drax continued. We need to get inside the bioship and inject the virus directly into its central nervous system. Helen looked at her senior staff, the best humanity had to offer, standing around a table discussing an enemy that shouldn't exist. Major, that's a suicide mission. Yes, ma'am, but it's also the only chance we have of stopping this thing before it reaches the core worlds. Chapter 6. Into the Wound. The insertion team consisted of 12 Special Forces operatives, Dr. Keene, and enough cognitive virus to theoretically disrupt a planetary-scale neural network. They approached the bioship in a stealth transport, aiming for one of the massive breathing orifices that served as both weapons ports and docking bays. Jesus Christ, muttered Sergeant Willis, as they passed through the wound mouth into the ship's interior. It's like flying into the throat of a god. The interior of the bioship was a cathedral of organs, massive structures that might have been computers or might have been neural clusters pulsed with bioluminescent light. Corridors stretched away in all directions, their walls lined with what looked like neural tissue. And everywhere, embedded in the living walls like flies in amber, were the bodies of absorbed beings from 100 different species. They're all still alive, Keene whispered, scanning the embedded forms. Physically alive, but their consciousness has been integrated into the collective. They're broadcasting constantly. Memories, emotions, knowledge. Drax led the team deeper into the ship, following Keene's readings toward what appeared to be the central processing core. The deeper they went, the more the ship seemed aware of their presence. The walls began to pulse faster, and a sound like whispered voices began to echo from the neural tissue around them. Major, called out Corporal Santos, I'm hearing something. Voices. Human voices. Stay focused, Santos. It's trying to get into your head. But as they approached the central core, even Drax began to hear them. Fragments of conversation, childhood memories, last words spoken by people who'd been consumed by the entity. The voices of Colony 7B mixed with others, species whose names humanity had never learned, all blended into a chorus of the absorbed. The injection. The central core was a sphere the size of a city block, its surface covered with neural pathways that pulsed with the thoughts of millions of absorbed minds. Keene's virus was designed to create feedback loops in the neural network, forcing the absorbed personalities to reassert their individual identities instead of functioning as components of the collective. This is it, she said, preparing the injection system. Once I introduce the virus, the entity's control should begin to break down, but I need to warn you. The process might be traumatic for the absorbed minds. They've been integrated for so long that sudden individuation could be psychologically devastating. Drax watched the neural pathways pulse with alien thought patterns. Better traumatized than consumed, Doc. Do it. The injection was anticlimactic, a small device pressed against the organic surface, a brief hiss as the virus was introduced into the neural network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screaming began. Not audible screaming, psychic screaming, the sound of millions of minds suddenly remembering what it felt like to be individual, to be alone, to be afraid. The bioship convulsed around them as its collective consciousness began to fragment. It's working! Keene shouted over the chaos as lights flashed and neural tissues sparked with overloaded synapses. The absorbed personalities are reasserting themselves. But something was wrong. Drax could feel it, a strange sensation in his mind, as if someone was trying to speak to him from inside his own thoughts. The voices that had whispered from the walls were getting clearer, more distinct. Major, Santos called out, I can hear them talking to me. The absorbed ones. They're saying thank you. Drax felt the first foreign memory slip into his consciousness like water seeping through a crack. A memory of flying through space with wings made of starlight. A memory that wasn't his. "Doc," he said quietly, "I think your virus is doing more than just freeing them." Integration. As the bioship tore itself apart around them, more memories flowed into Drax's mind. Not just human memories from the colonists, but alien memories from species that had been consumed centuries ago. He saw worlds of crystal and song, creatures that communicated through shifting colors, civilizations that had built cities in the hearts of stars. The virus isn't just breaking the collective apart, Dr. Keene realized with growing horror. It's redistributing the absorbed consciousness. Every mind that was part of the entity is being shared among available neural networks. "You mean us," Santos said, his voice changing subtly as alien memories began to influence his speech patterns. The extraction was a nightmare of collapsing biocorridors and synaptic lightning. Half the team was lost when a neural cluster exploded, their bodies absorbed by the dying ship. The survivors barely made it back to their transport as the bioship began to consume itself. From the bridge of the Determination, Admiral Helen watched the massive entity writhe in space, its continent-sized bulk breaking apart as the virus spread through its neural networks. Smaller bioships that had been controlled by the collective were now flying in random directions, no longer coordinated by the central intelligence. "It's working," she breathed. "The entity is fragmenting." But when Drax's team returned to the fleet, the true scope of what they'd accomplished became clear. The new voices. "I remember being a creature of pure thought, swimming through nebulae," Drax said during his debriefing, his voice carrying accents that hadn't existed in any human language. "I remember the taste of starlight and the song of gravitational waves. I remember dying when the harvesters came to my world 3 million years ago." Dr. Keene monitored the neural patterns of the surviving team members with growing fascination and dread. Each of them now carried fragments of the absorbed personalities, memories, skills, and perspectives from dozens of different species. "They're not losing their humanity," she reported to Admiral Helen. "They're gaining something else on top of it. The absorbed minds aren't taking over, they're sharing. It's like having permanent access to the memories and knowledge of beings from across the galaxy." Santos demonstrated this by speaking in a language that predated human civilization, explaining mathematical concepts that no human had ever conceived. Willis showed an intuitive understanding of technologies that wouldn't be invented for centuries. "Is it permanent?" Helen asked. "Unknown. The neural integration appears stable, but we're dealing with unprecedented xenobiological effects. The team members report feeling expanded, like they're still themselves but with access to libraries of experience they never lived." The price of victory. The bioship died 3 hours after the virus injection, breaking apart into component organisms that scattered across the system like spores. Some headed for deep space, no longer controlled by a central intelligence. Others simply shut down, their biological systems failing without the collective consciousness to coordinate them. Colony 7B was saved, in a sense. The affected colonists began to wake up as the entity's control faded, but they too carried fragments of absorbed memories. The entire population would need extensive psychological counseling to process the alien experiences that had been forced into their minds. Admiral Holland stood in the medical bay, watching Dr. Keene examine the neural scans from the surviving team members. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, are they still human?" Keene looked up from her instruments, her eyes carrying the weight of discoveries that would reshape humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. "They're human plus, Admiral, still recognizably themselves but with access to perspectives and knowledge from beings who evolved under alien stars. They remember being creatures of crystal and song, beings of pure energy, hive minds that span solar systems." From his bed nearby, Drax spoke up, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats. "We're still us, Admiral, but we're also them. Every species that thing consumed over millions of years. We remember their sciences, their arts, their ways of thinking. It's like suddenly having the memories of 1,000 different lifetimes." Howland felt the implications settling over her like a blanket of lead. "And the entity itself? Dead. Keen confirmed, but not destroyed. Distributed. Every absorbed mind has been freed, but they've been scattered among human consciousness. We saved them, but we also became them. As the determination prepared for the journey home, Admiral Hallen found herself wondering if humanity had won or simply changed into something unrecognizable. The threat was ended. The colonies were safe, but the species that would return to Earth carried the memories of a million worlds. In the end, perhaps that was humanity's greatest strength. Not just the ability to survive, but the ability to grow, to adapt, to become more than they had been. The cosmos was vast and filled with wonders and horrors beyond imagination. But humans had faced the ultimate violation, the consumption of identity itself, and had turned it into an opportunity for expansion. As Drax often said in his new multitonal voice, we are still human. We are just human enough for all of us. The New Earth. 6 months later, Earth's xenological institutes were revolutionizing science with knowledge provided by the integrated, the human survivors who carried alien memories. Technologies that would have taken centuries to develop were being prototyped in months. Art forms impossible for purely human consciousness were flourishing in galleries across the solar system. The colonists of 7b had formed the first truly interspecies society, their shared memories creating bonds of understanding that transcended the barriers between different forms of life. Children born on the colony spoke in harmonics that carried the song languages of species that had died before Earth's sun was born. Admiral Hallen, now head of the new Xenological Integration Department, often wondered if humanity had lost something essential in gaining so much. But when she saw former Corporal Santos teaching mathematics using geometric concepts from crystalline beings, or watched Dr. Keen develop medicines based on the biological knowledge of energy creatures, she knew they had chosen correctly. The universe was vast and full of threats, but humanity no longer faced it alone. They carried the memories, wisdom, and dreams of every species that had fallen to the darkness between stars. In saving themselves, they had become something new, not just human, but the inheritors of a galactic civilization. And in the deepest vaults beneath the Lunar Research Station, carefully contained samples of the bioship's neural tissue continued to pulse with faint life, whispering secrets that would keep xenobiologists busy for generations to come. The harvest was over. The memory keepers had begun.